Last time out, 5 weeks ago at Donington Park, conditions couldn't have been much different for the fourth race of the 2019 British Talent Cup. After a delayed start, the track began to dry but remained greasy, playing its part in an exciting race with a dramatic conclusion. In the early stages, it was Cameron Horseman, the points leader after back-to-back victories, who threatened to pull clear of the chasing pack, only for Fenton Seabright and Charlie Atkins to give chase. And the three-rider group at the front of the field then became five, with Scott Ogden up from 10th on the grid and Charlie Farrer also making progress. But it was Farrer who was to become the catalyst for the last lap drama. His over-ambitious inside move coming unstuck and causing a three-rider pile-up. Early leader Horseman reduced to a scoreless ride, and Scott Ogden's fight through from 10th on the grid rewarded with victory. Welcome back to Donington Park for round 3 of the 2019 British Talent Cup, comprised of 2 races this weekend running alongside the World Superbike calendar for the only time in 2019. This series sees a cast of youth talent competing on equal Honda SFR 250R Moto3 machinery over a 6-round season that culminates in August at Silverstone alongside MotoGP. After a break of over a month, our competitors have had ample time to assess their progress and plot the remaining 4 rounds as we head to the season's midpoint this weekend. Alongside me for the 5th and 6th races of the season is Steve English. Steve, 4 races so far and 42 points separating the top 3 in the standings. All of the riders gained experience of this track 5 weeks ago, and this, therefore, should be an interesting round.
Yeah, 5 weeks ago, when they supported the British Superbike Championship, we raced here on the national circuit at Donington Park, slightly shorter, slightly different, and that's where we saw that bit of chaos in race 2 here in Donington Park. But for all these British Talent Cup riders, they know that this is a really important round. This is the halfway point of the season. The year started at Silverstone supporting the British Superbike Championship back here at Donington, and now we're here in support of the WorldSBK paddock. From this point on, this is where the real road to MotoGP starts. You support the World Superbike paddock. You've also got races supporting the MotoGP paddock later in the year as well. This is where the real championship will be won for these riders.
Let's take a look at the grid then, starting from pole position. Scott Ogden, the 15-year-old from Doncaster. This is his 2nd British Talent Cup season. Alongside him, Fenton Seabright, who was brought down in the opening race of 2019 as Elliot Pinson's innocent victim. He'd been making up ground since then. 3rd and 2nd here in May. The former KTM British Junior Cup winner. He's brought himself back into contention in 3rd overall. Completing the front row is Rhys Irwin, the Irishman, one of only 5 riders to have scored at every race so far in 2019. 3rd place in yesterday's qualifying session, his first front row start of the campaign as he bids for a first podium in the series.
Yeah, when you look at that front row of the grid, plenty of experience there despite the fact that it's quite a young front row of the grid. Ogden's looked really good this season. He was the fastest man in pre-season testing in Valencia. He's been able to build on that with podiums in every race so far this year. Fenton Seabright on the 22, keep an eye out for him. He had a podium in the European Talent Cup race at Estoril at the start of the season as well. He's doing both of those championships.
Second row of the grid, Cameron Horseman starting from P4, one of 2 riders on this starting grid to have taken 2 victories in 2019, race 2 at Silverstone and race 1 at Donington in May. Being brought down in race 2, he now has 20 points to make up in the series overall. Alongside him, P5, Jack Nixon, the oldest rider in the field at 18 years of age. Nixon had 2 seasons in the British Junior Cup before making his British Talent Cup debut in 2018. 2 4th places to his name this season. He's yet to take his first podium at this level. And completing the second row of the grid, Brian Hart, the pre-season favourite, the best ranked in 2018 of the riders who didn't graduate away from the BTC for 2019. Having finished 5th overall last year, he sits only 7th, tailing off since a runner-up ranking at the season opener at Silverstone. That's your second row.
Yeah, and Horseman on the 23, he's the man to watch. Himself and Ogden have dominated this season so far. They've also dominated the standard Moto3 Cup in the UK through the course this season so far. It's Ogden that leads the championship by 20 points here in the British Talent Cup. Obviously for Horseman, taken out in that last race last time out, and suddenly he's found himself on the back foot in this championship, but he leads the Moto3 Standard Cup in the UK.
Third row of the grid will feature Jack Hart from 7th position, riding with the number 10. Hart, the lead Scotsman in the standings, the runner-up at race 2 from Silverstone. This is the first time he's qualified off the front row of the grid, so he'll be very keen to move through off the line. Watch out for Charlie Farrer coming through from 9th position on the grid as well, and Charlie Atkins lines up between them. This is Jack Hart, the Scotsman, as I said, retirement in Silverstone. He's been a top 10 finisher since then.
Yeah, Hart has had a pretty solid season so far this year. He said watch out for Charlie Farrer, and I'll tell you what, everyone in the field's going to be looking out for Charlie on that number 19 after what happened the last time we were here at Donington Park in that last lap down into that final chicane. But for Charlie, the big thing is he wants to try and get that first career podium in the British Talent Cup this weekend.
Alongside Jack Hart, and in between himself and Charlie Farrer, it's Charlie Atkins who'll be starting from P8. Atkins 10th in the standings at the moment with 3 scoring rides in 4 races. Here he is, but he's still looking for his first top 5 finish of 2019. He started last season with 1 here at Donington Park, 5th, his best finish to date. Yeah,
and through the course this weekend he's been a regular top 10 man. He was actually 5th fastest after the practice sessions yesterday, dropped back a little bit in the qualifying session, but he's going to be there or thereabouts during this race.
Charlie Farrer, the man you were talking about a couple of moments ago, Steve, the former Aprilia Super Team champion, retired from both races here in May, so he'll be keen to make amends this weekend. He was a strong finisher in both Silverstone races, optimistic therefore of moving up from outside the top 10.
Yeah, and a top 10 runner last season, and just trying to make that step to be a top 5 runner and a podium threat during the course of his second season in the British Talent Cup.
Row number 4, this man, Harvey Claridge. I followed this young man up from the British Mini Bike Championship. He was one of the stars of the show at that point at 10 years of age. The youngster from Worthing on the south coast. He made massive progress from last season to this. In fact, from just 4 races in 2019, he's already on treble his total score from last season, the progress we typically see at this age.
And that's the best thing about these Talent Cups. It's all about learning from your experience. If you think back over the years of the riders that have come through the Asia Talent Cup, or what we're seeing now in the European Talent Cup, if you think that Manuel Gonzalez, the championship leader in the Super Sport 300 class, he came through the European Talent Cup. You look down the list of former riders that have been in the Asia Talent Cup: Sasaki, Toba, Misaki, Ayagura. They've all come through that route, and it took them a year, 2 years to really find their feet in their Talent Cups, and that's where we expect to see riders make that big step forward.
11th on the grid will be Jamie Davis, the 14-year-old from Haywards Heath in West Sussex. 7th from race 1 at Silverstone. His best result so far. He sits 12th overall in the standings.
And for all these riders, this is the chance to really try and get yourself up those points. The races come thick and fast now. Here at Donington Park, we've got a double header, 2 weeks' time, where it's Snetterton for the next round of the championship. And suddenly these next 2 rounds, they're the real chance to try and claw back a lot of championship points. Give yourself a chance of winning this championship.
Completing the 4th row for the record, Scott Swan, the Northern Irishman, who claimed his first podium last time out here at Donington Park. So there's some real strength in depth on this grid, Steve. Right the way through the field, there are riders who can live with the pace at the front, and it'll be interesting to see if they go as a pack, as we tend to see in these smaller capacity machine categories.
Well, the one thing about Donington Park is it can be quite hard to stay in that pack, just because a lot of the corners here, they're off camber. It's quite difficult to actually maintain your momentum while you're overtaking people. That's why we can see, even in the small capacity races, the pack racing develop into probably 4 or 5 riders rather than the typical 10 riders you can see at the top of a group of Moto 3 riders like this. But you would expect here at Donington Park, a track that all these riders know well. They've raced here already this season. They've also had the Moto 3 Standard Cup in the UK for a lot of these riders. They're all race fit and ready for this, and you'd expect to see a really close race here today.
These riders have tackled the national circuit before. They're tackling the international circuit here, which is the standard that we see throughout the World Superbike paddock, of course, as this is a support class for WorldSBK this weekend. But that means the addition of the Melbourne Loop, which was added onto the track in the 1980s.
Yeah, and it is quite a different track as a result of the national circuit. You just cut out that loop at the end of the track, but the national track worked out really well, actually. And for the British Championship, whether it was on a Superbike or in the British Talent Cup, that was a track layout that proved very popular with all the riders. Instead of cutting into the left here at the Foggy S's, they cut right straight onto the pit lane, onto the pit straight. So for all these riders, a slightly different track, but it just gives them more area to play with.
So building up to the action here, it's 15 laps, Steve, and plenty of time for action, but they saved it right till the last lap last time out around here.
And that's typically what you see in the British Talent Cup. It is a case of trying to whittle your way down in the front of the field, just to lose some riders in that group, try and just have a straight up battle on that last lap. It's very difficult to try and pull away. And if you look back at over the last year, who were the experienced riders? They were the ones that ended up making the best results. Rory Skinner was the champion last year. He's moved on to the Super Sport class in the British Superbike paddock this season. So it's all about having that experience. And that's where the likes of the second season, for the likes of Scott Ogden, Horseman, having that extra time on the bikes, that can make a big difference.
Reminder of the championship standings coming into this race, with 8 races still to come in 2019. It's Scott Ogden who leads by 20 points after a non-score last time out for Cameron Horseman. Fenton Seabright is the rider chasing 22 points further back, and then a whole pack of riders that have proven evenly matched so far in this 2019 season. The riders settling in across the start line then, as we wait for the number 15, Rhys Irwin, just to come into position third on the grid. Now that he's completed the front row, all of the riders in position for race 1 at this third round of the 2019 British Talent Cup. Riders watching for the lights, and we are underway. Ogden has made a decent jump, actually a good start from fourth off the line as well from Cameron Horseman. See how they settle down into the first turn. It's pole sitter Scott Ogden who leads them away, chased by Horseman and Seabright. The top 3 have broken ever so slightly. Look at the pack filtering their way through, all clean around Redgate and off towards the Craner Curves, but a good early break from Scott Ogden. Yeah,
Ogden able to take that lead down in towards Craner Curves, down to the old hairpin from Seabright. Horseman, top 3 riders here. They've been the 3 riders to really watch through the course of this season so far. Good start from them. We saw Hart made a really bad start from the third row of the grid. He's fallen all the way down the field on the number 10 machine. He lost about 6 places on those first couple of corners.
So Jack Hart from 7th down to 13th. Brian Hart, no relation, meanwhile, has moved up into 5th position, is challenging with Rhys Irwin over that 4th place. In fact, you can see the group from 4th position down, a huge train of riders. Line astern in there in the mix, as well as Harvey Claridge, who's made a great start. Claridge up from 10th position, one of the riders I talked about, one of the younger riders in the field, who I mentioned before we got underway. But immediately we've got a group of 3 and then a chasing train, Steve.
Yeah, and it is a big gap now between Rhys Irwin on the 15 and back to the P3 of Horseman there on the 23. So if Rhys Irwin needs to try and get his head down, try and close that gap down, you can see Charlie Swan's managed to get himself up into 5th position in front of his fellow Irishman.
So Swan breaking clear at the front of that group, but the question is, can that group manage to merge into one with the 3 race leaders, Ogden, Seabright and Horseman, who, remember, are the top 3 in the championship standings as well. Ogden, our current points leader, he's out in front doing exactly what he needs to do.
Yeah, and that's exactly what we've seen all the way through this season so far from Ogden. And you can see Eddie
O'Shea has gone down, and that will be disappointment for him. He was outside of the point scoring positions at the time, but down he goes at the hairpin.
Yeah, and he fell down from about 17th position there for O'Shea, and down at the hairpin, easily done through there as well, especially considering we've had a lot of rain over the last few hours here at Donington Park.
And we've got another faller, so the early stages of this race, and immediately incident packed, as you'd expect in the British Talent Cup. And the problem for these young riders is that we see them trying to pick up the machine and get them away. Harvey Claridge, that is, according to the graphic up on the screen, we could only see the shot from behind, which made it more challenging to identify the rider. But Claridge has gone down, which is a shame, because it was a strong start, up from 10th on the grid into 5th position in the early running, and he's fallen.
Yeah, and it's easily done here at Donington Park. I was just saying, we've had a lot of rain through the course of this morning and this afternoon that affected the Superbike race, and the riders all just trying to battle with those conditions, try and get the most from their bikes around here, and it is very difficult for. Let's have a wee look at this replay as we come across the line. This is where we should see Claridge having his mistake down in towards turn 1. He's the rider on the left hand side on the outside. Not really touched there by the rider on the inside, but you're feeling that presence, and for Claridge, he just tries to defend his position, probably just going a little bit too hard for the conditions we have. Low grip here at Donington Park today.
Is it possible that the outside line was greasier than the inside where the riders have conventionally been?
Well, the one thing about the track conditions we have right now is only an hour ago the Superbike riders were out full wet tyres, so it was really difficult to get enough grip down here. We've had a 300 race since then, so a drier line has developed, but for all these Moto 3 bikes, it's such a tight, narrow line on the run around this racetrack that maybe down into turn 1, just getting caught out there for Claridge.
2 laps gone, 13 laps still to go. It's Seabright who leads ahead of Horseman. Ogden has gone to the back of that group. It's Swan who is the fastest man out on the circuit at the moment from P4, so he's trying to bridge that gap, Steve.
Yeah, Scott Swan doing a really good job there, 16-year-old. As you said earlier on, Alex, he had his first podium of his British Talent Cup career here, and he's trying to make sure he's in that fight once again. He's actually opening up a little bit of a gap there to Rhys Irwin as well.
So Swan trying to break from Irwin. Nixon also in that group. Farah further back, the secondary group as it were. The second group behind the lead peloton has started to break away. So that's from Farah in 7th position down to Ross Maguire all the way down in 13th position. So Farah 4 seconds back from the lead as the lead swaps and changes. You can see visibly now Swan is closing.
Yeah, and Horseman's not afraid there in the number 23 machine. We saw him run all the way around the outside onto the curbs on the exit there of Schwantz, just trying to put himself into a position to make the move into McLean's. As I said, we've had a lot of rain, so the curbs are going to hold some of that moisture, and to have that confidence to drive all the way around the outside shows exactly what Horseman thinks he can do here today.
Well, we've certainly got a 4-rider group at the front of the field now, because the number 20, Swan, is tagged right to the tail of Scott Ogden, our current championship leader. And if the top 3 in the standings thought they were going to have it easy, breaking 1 second clear of everyone else at the start of this race, that expectation has proven unfounded, because 3 riders have now gone with them.
Yeah, and you see at the back of that group as well, Rhys Irwin and Nixon trying to go with them. That's Irwin on the number 15 machine, and just behind them is the number 2 and Nixon. They're trying to make sure that we've got 6 riders in this lead group. I said earlier on, Donington Park, we don't tend to see the huge groups that you can see in Moto 3 class racing, and it can break down into 4, 5, 6 riders, and that's exactly what's happened here in the early stages of this race. So for all these riders, you're going to try and just prod, you're going to try and see whether or not you can try and make moves. That's exactly what we're seeing with 22 there from Seabright. He gets down the inside. Is he able to hold on to that lead? Good move from Fenton Seabright to get down the inside. He's got lots of experience as well, Alex. He's racing in the European Talent Cup, the exact same spec of bike, so he's had plenty of time in these bikes through the course of this season so far.
Seabright now from Horseman, Ogden and Swan. Fastest of the lead 6 last time around was Nixon, who's at the back of this group, Jack Nixon, and more experienced than some of the other riders in this field. He is, as I said previously in the build-up, the oldest rider in the field, and he's making that pay at the moment as he tries to keep with that lead sextet. Farah in 7th position at the moment, 2 seconds the gap between 6th and 7th. Bridging that is going to be probably a step too far.
Yeah, it will be. It's going to be these leading 6 riders just to see who's able to carry the speed, who's able to open up a little bit of a gap, who's going to be able to drop the riders behind them. Swan's been able to get himself up into those top 3 spots, but you can see Ogden, the championship leader, on the number 4. He's trying to get down around the outside into the foggy S's. Can you break deep enough? Good riding there from Swan just to be able to make sure he's still able to take command of the apex down in towards the braking zone there for the foggy S's.
Brave stuff from Scott Swan, who, remember, has come up from 12th position on the grid, who now moves into 3rd place and ahead of the championship leader, Scott Ogden. Ogden is going to quickly have company now from Irwin directly behind, and from Nixon, who rounds out the top 6. This is what it would do in terms of the championship as things stand, although the positions change from one corner to the next in the British Talent Cup very often. As things stand, it would be Ogden who would lead by 13 points. Remember, he comes into this race with a 20-point lead, and that's because Horseman at the moment sits in 2nd, and Ogden has been relegated down to 4th, although he may have a go down the inside here for 3rd position. Back into turn number 1 into Redgate, sweeping across the front of him, it's Swan. Ogden stays 4th.
Yeah, and if you're Ogden, you want to try and make this move as quickly as possible, because at the front of the field, Fenton Seabright is trying to stretch out a lead now. He set the fastest lap of the race by over half a second last time around, so he's now opened up 6/10 of a second at the front of the field. So Seabright on the 22 trying to just break away from Horseman on the 23.
Notice that coming off Redgate and down towards Hollywood, I think it was Irwin just a little bit behind the top 4, really hit the curb, and it seemed to affect his balance and affect his speed.
Yeah, and for Irwin, we've seen it at times that he has the speed, it's just trying to get that consistency, and you can see there with number 2 of Nixon able to just pick him off on the run through McLean's. And for Irwin, the potential's there for him, and he's shown that all the way through this season so far, but it's just trying to be able to get that consistency to always be in that front group.
So Seabright is your leader ahead of Horseman Swan. Ogden now relegated down to 4th position. Nixon, as you said, has passed Irwin, and that's how we currently stand in the top 6, separated by 1 1/4 seconds as Swan loses out to Ogden and tries to recover back down the inside. These three swapping and changing seconds of 4th, Steve, and as you said, they've got to be careful because Seabright has a 1/2 second advantage that he's extended in that last sector.
Yeah, Seabright just pulling away another few tenths of a second on this lap. Ogden on the number 4 gets down the inside into P2. Is he going to be able to try and close down? You can see there he taps his tail unit. He wants to make sure that the 23 of Horseman stays behind him. He wants to close down the gap to Seabright. But I tell you what, I haven't seen too many riders take any heed of that once you're being told to stay behind anyone.
No, how many times have we seen that international signal for I know you're not going to do it, but please stay behind me. Seabright it is who leads, and it's now a second his advantage up front.
Yeah, Seabright, another fastest lap of the race. He only pulled out 1/2 tenth of a second last time around from Ogden, but he's doing exactly what he has to do, just edging himself away bit by bit in the lead of this race. And with Ogden now up into second, the big question is going to be, can Ogden close down that gap? It's exactly 1 second, but now that he's got his way to the front of that group, he's now got the chance to try and just close down the gap to Fenton Seabright. Is he fast enough to do it?
Highly creditable fastest lap of the race, 1:41.301 from Seabright last time.
Yeah, good pace so far from Seabright. Ogden also in the 41.3s. Horseman behind him about a 1/2 second slower, and he did lose that second position to Ogden. So for Fenton Seabright, for Horseman, and for Ogden at the front of this field, it really is a case of just trying to make sure you're able to hit your markers and close down that gap. Seabright with a lead now that is coming down. It's 6/10 of a second between himself and Scott Ogden. So Ogden, the championship leader, doing exactly what you'd expect from him, just edging himself closer and closer and closer. You can see the number 20 there of Swan has been dropped a little bit.
1.5 seconds now the gap from 1st to 4th, and then a further almost second to Nixon in 5th position, and another couple of tenths to Irwin in P6. The secondary group led by Farah is now 3 seconds adrift, so we are very much down to a 6-horse race with 10 laps or less than 10 laps still to go here at Donington Park. We've seen action on the last lap before. It wouldn't surprise me if we see these 6 bunch back up together slightly, but at the moment a gap behind 3rd to 4th position.
Yeah, it looks like we're going to end up with 3 and 3 right now, and you can see that in 4th position there, Swan, Nixon and Rhys Irwin just don't seem to quite have the same pace as the 3 leaders, Seabright, Ogden and Horseman, and that's what we've seen all the way through the season so far. They're the 3 riders at the top of the championship, and they're the 3 riders that have separated themselves more often than not from everyone else.
Another new fastest lap of the race. This time it is our championship leader, Scott Ogden, with a 1:40.847. He's trying to haul back the deficit. He trails Seabright, remember, 7/10 of a second is now the deficit. Horseman also within a second of your race leader. As you suggested, Steve, there's a second that's broken now behind Horseman to Swan, who sits in 4th position. We're watching the 3rd group, as it were. This is the battle for 7th position with Farah, Hart and Hart.
Tell you what, I don't half love the British Talent Cup for the racing you see down the field. All these riders all able to fight with one another. You can see here in this scrap all the way down the order, this is the fight for 10th position with Atkins, Leigh and Collins just all trying to fight with one another. The thing about this is, though, are they able to work together to try and close that gap on Hart and number 10, who's up in 9th position, or are they just going to get focused on the battle with one another?
It looks like they're pretty much knocking spots off one another as things stand for 11th and 12th positions. As we see a wide shot, you can see that the distance that they've got to try and cover to Brian Hart, who started 6th on the grid, who is currently running in P9, having been passed on this lap by Jack Hart. But these two swapping and changing positions, the 10 and the 9, and with Farah directly ahead of them. I suppose a damage limitation game to an extent for Farah. He can't stay with the top 6, so 7th is the best he can do here.
Yeah, exactly, and that's what you can do on the number 19 if you're Charlie Farah. Try and see what you can get out of this race. At the front of the field, though, it's Horseman that's the fastest man in that group. Last time around, you can see Seabright in that final sector, he's actually just been able to edge a little bit away from the rest of the pack, but Horseman for the first 3 sectors was closing up quite a bit on them. The gap at the front of the field, it's still a second between the top 3, but Seabright trying to answer back and try and just make sure that he's able to keep Ogden at bay. Seabright, this is a big weekend for him. Last time we were here at Donington Park, he was able to finish on the podium twice, but at Silverstone at round 1, he had a crash in race 1, and he finished in the lower reaches of the lead pack then in race 2, so he's got a bit of ground to make up in the championship standings.
Half the race gone here at Donington Park, the first of 2 races this weekend at round 3 of the 2019 British Talent Cup. And we have Fenton Seabright, who leads the way as things stand. This would be good for his championship as a whole, because he's got the current series leader directly behind him, Scott Ogden, and he would make back some of the 42-point deficit that he's currently got to the leader. Sticking with him, though, is Ogden, and Horseman a little bit tailed off so far on this lap. Yeah,
and Ogden's pulled up half a second already on this lap. Is he close enough to try and make a move down into the S's? Not close enough, but the big thing for him is the race leader, Seabright, is going to know that Ogden's there, and he's willing to try and make a move now as well. So you can see with Seabright on the 22, he's not riding defensively yet. We're still only at half distance in this race, so still plenty of time before the gloves fully come off in this battle. But Ogden's just doing what he has to do. He's applying that pressure on the race leader, Seabright.
One thing that Scott Ogden will be well aware of is the fact that he doesn't want to end it in tears, because he's been the one rider of the top 3 in the championship who's finished every race, who's been on the podium at every race. So any position 1st to 3rd is good for him in the context of the series overall. Now, it's always easy to say that with a mature head, but sometimes the youngsters aren't quite so aware and always want to be top spot, understandably so.
Tell you what, I've never missed a shot from the commentary box. I've never made a mistake, and for all these riders out on track, they're the ones on the bike, and it's a lot easier whenever you're able to take yourself away from the situation and have a look from a much more global view. Once you're on the bike, all you're thinking about is being able to get in front of the guy that is in front of you, and that's exactly what we're seeing at the front of the field with Ogden on the number 4, just closing that gap down to just a 1/10 of a second. This is the fight for 4th between Nixon, Swan and Rhys Owen. It's Swan at the front of this on the number 20.
So here we switch back to Seabright, Ogden and Horseman, our race leading trio. Still with just over a second between the 3 of them. Ogden has a look over his shoulder. Where's Horseman in comparison? Horseman, remember, is Ogden's nearest rival in the context of the championship overall. Is that enough to spur Ogden on to make a move on Seabright? He certainly looks faster. Cuts back. The 2 are side by side as they come down towards the chicane. The inside is with Seabright. Ogden, though, has got the pace and comes through for the race lead. So Scott Ogden is your new race leader, the championship leader. Hits the front.
Yeah, really good aggressive riding on the break point there from Ogden to be able to hit the front on the number 4 machine. He just waited until he hit his marker. Is he going to get an attack down the inside there from Seabright? Not quite close enough from Fenton to try and do that, but Seabright's going to try and set up a good run through the Melbourne Loop to see if he's able to get close enough down in towards the last corner of Goddard's. Looks like he's probably a little bit too far back.
And the one thing that Scott Ogden will be well aware of is if he gets into a mix fighting with Seabright directly behind, he could open the door for his main championship rival in the points, Horseman, to get in on the action here at the front, because Horseman has covered that gap now, and there's just 6/10 of a second. He's gained half a second on that previous lap. Just 6/10 now between the top 3.
Yeah, a bit of fighting there has let Horseman just close that gap down. He's actually stayed pretty constant to Ogden, about 6/10 of a second, but now we've only got 6/10 between the race leader and the man in 3rd. So Seabright's going to be under pressure now as well, and if Horseman on the 23 wants to have any chance of being able to close down the championship lead of Ogden, he really needs to make the move quickly, because the one thing for Ogden is, as it stands right now, he'd hold a 29-point lead in the championship. This is going to be the halfway stage of the season, so you really need to be able to close that down. It looks like Seabright back out in front there from Ogden, so Seabright doing what he can to make sure he's able to give himself the chance of staying in this title contention. Those 8 points that he scored at round 1 at Silverstone, really costly, because the other riders were up on the podium.
Seabright from Ogden, from Horseman, the secondary battle. Now 6 seconds further back, Nixon, Irwin and Swan. Just saw Seabright running a bit wide there, and that's exactly where Ogden made his ground last lap around as well. But this time, Seabright's tucked into the slipstream as they head down towards the chicane. Ogden is again good enough on the brakes to hold on for the race lead.
Yeah, Ogden nice and aggressive on the brake point to be able to get himself back in front and just know that he's able to hold on to that position on the run through the S's. Let's see if Seabright's close enough to try and make a move down into the foggy S, into the Melbourne Loop. Not close enough that time around, but look at how he just tries to roll around that corner and pick up his throttle nice and early to try and set up a run down in towards Goddard's. If you're Fenton Seabright on the 22, you really need to now start thinking about, we got 5 laps from home, where can I be strong to try and make these moves?
So, once again, it's Scott Ogden, the championship leader, already twice a winner in 2019, who is at the front of the field. 5 laps remaining, and it's Ogden from Seabright and Horseman in 3rd position. Half a second covers the top trio.
Half a second covering the
top. And down goes Seabright from 2nd position. Ogden and Horseman are released to duel at the top of the field, and that secondary battle from 4th position down will now become a podium scrap.
And unfortunately for Seabright, that's what we saw at Silverstone as well. Just costly mistake, and it's going to cost him his points. So here's a replay. Look at the rider in second. Just loses that front coming down through Redgate. We've had a lot of rain. Maybe a little bit tight in the line there and just not quite onto where you need to be for the dry piece of the track here, and just gets caught out. Looks like he's just carrying a little bit too much speed through there, a little bit unstable. And Seabright goes down. Suddenly Ogden and Horseman are now released into that fight for the race lead. And Ogden's got 0.7 of a second. He's putting the hammer down now. Just before Seabright crashed, I was about to say, the race pace right now, it's dropped right off. They're a second slower than the fastest lap of the race. I'd say Ogden now has got the head down. He's going to try and make sure he can break away from Horseman and just give himself the chance with 4.5 laps to go to have a relatively comfortable run to the line.
The crash there for Fenton Seabright means that we're going to leave this race with a significant gap behind second in the championship if things stay as they are. Ogden and Horseman leading the way, and just as they have a significant advantage on track, they will have a significant advantage in the points. Suddenly this fight between Nixon, Swan and Irwin takes on real importance, because it's over now a podium place, and Nixon it is who occupies it at present.
Yeah, and you want to make sure you're able to get yourself onto the podium. All these riders chasing that podium spot. Of course, for Swan, he's been able to stand on the podium already this season, but for Nixon and for Rhys Irwin, they want to get themselves up there for the first time.
Swan, who was third position last time out at round 2 in Donington Park, so once again around this circuit he's up there and challenging for a podium place. Will he be able to move into a provisional podium slot as they go into Redgate once again? 4 laps remaining. Nixon holds on. Third position for Nixon ahead of Swan and Irwin. And while Ogden and Horseman have over half a second between them, these three, you sense this race is going to go right to the finish, Steve.
Yeah, exactly. You'd imagine for the fight for third, they're going to have this scrap all the way to the end. They've been scrapping right from the start of this race as well. The gap between them and Horseman, it's around about 9 seconds. And the gap behind them, it's about 2.5 seconds to Charlie Farrar's group. So they've got a little bit of a margin to play with behind them. And we'll wait and see whether or not they're scrap, which is going to intensify over the next couple of laps, whether it's going to cost them time. You can see there with Rhys Irwin making that move. That's a move that doesn't tend to cost too much time there for Irwin, but as you can see for Swan there on the number 20, can cost you quite a bit of time. It can cost you that momentum, and that's what can bring the group behind a little bit closer to you.
So let's see whether Charlie Farrar can close in. Remember, started 9th on the grid and is now up into 6th position and has already gained 0.4 of a second on this lap. So Farrar will be optimistic that if these three keep fighting one another, he'll be able to get into the mix. Farrar sitting in P6 at the moment. 2.2 seconds is the gap, so still a fair amount of ground to cover as Irwin thinks about a move down the inside. Nixon holds on. Still Ogden from Horseman, from Nixon, from Irwin, from Swan, your top 5 with just over 3 laps remaining. Further back then, Steve, Farrar still with close company. 3 riders right on his tail.
Yeah, that's become a real scrap there as well with Charlie Farrar, but they've now got the chance to try and close that up on this fight for the podium. They've only got 3 laps to go, so it is going to be a big ask for Charlie Farrar on the 19 to try and bring them closer to them. They're only pulling in about 1/4 second a lap. They really need to be upping that to be able to close down this group. But for the 3 riders here trying to fight for those podium spots, you can see there with the number 2 of Nixon, the 15 of Irwin and the 20 of Swan, they're going to be absolutely going at it now, because this is their chance to get themselves up on the podium. As we said, Nixon's already had a podium this year, but for the likes of Swan, he really wants to get himself up there. He had a good start to this race. They lost ground with the race leaders, but they've been able to have this fight with one another. Pace has been pretty consistent, so they've done a good job, and the reward for one of them is going to be a trip to the podium.
Swan bidding for back-to-back podiums as he challenges up the inside here of Nixon, and through he comes. Jack Nixon then relegated down to 5th position as through up the inside comes Irwin as well. The pair almost touch for 4th and 5th places, side by side once again. Irwin at the moment is at the back of the group in P5, challenging on the tail of Jack Nixon, but not to be that time around. But these 3 are getting closer and closer and closer to coming together.
Yeah, and unfortunately behind them, the gap is also getting closer and closer and closer between Irwin and Charlie Farrar. On this lap so far, it's already been 3/4 of a second that they've lost with that bit of scrapping. So you can see here with the 15 of Rhys Irwin back to the 19, that gap is coming down, 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 and we've only got 2 laps to go. So is there enough time for Charlie Farrar to really close that gap?
And at the front, the gap has closed up through the last couple of sectors of that lap as well. Just 0.4 of a second now between Ogden and Horseman.
Yeah, and the fastest lap of the race for Horseman, or personal best of the race for Horseman. So he is really trying to press on now. He pulled back about a quarter of a second there last time around. So he's trying to just at least make sure that Ogden's kept honest in this. Ogden, through the course of this season so far, has been on the podium for all 4 races. And for a horseman, as we said earlier on, robbed of that podium last time out here at Donington after a crash with Charlie Farrar. So for a horseman, he knows the importance of trying to take back some of those points against Ogden.
Less than 2 laps remaining then here at Donington Park. It's race 1 of the 3rd round of the 2019 British Talent Cup, and it's Scott Ogden, your championship leader, the 15-year-old who is out in front but pursued by Cameron Horseman, who came through from the 2nd row of the grid, who's broken clear of challenger Fenton Seabright, who went down earlier on. And now we've got a head-to-head duel at the front of the field, and 2 separate groups becoming ever closer further behind, Steve.
Yeah, this is exactly what we want to see at the front of the field. We've got this dogfight between the 2 race leaders here, the 4 of Ogden, the 23 of Horseman. But behind them, the scrap for the podium's got Nixon, Irwin and Swan, but the gap behind them to Hart, Farrar, Atkins and Brian Hart, that's down to just a second now with a lap and a half to go. So that could well turn into a real scrap for that final step of the podium.
A few might want to put their eyes behind their hands here in the closing lap, because we saw all sorts of drama and are coming together on the final lap last time out at Donington Park, and I wouldn't put it past them to have another similarly exciting and frenetic final lap. At the moment, they're just a little bit too far behind that 3rd group to challenge for the podium places, and likewise, Horseman still a little bit too far behind to have a go at Ogden as they come into the final lap.
Yeah, Ogden doing what he can. Horseman with another personal best of this race, just to try and close that gap down a little bit more. We've talked about it a few times there, Alex. Last time around here at Donington Park, 3 riders crashed on the last lap of the race. This is now the scrap for that 3rd position.
Nixon holding the racing line. Swan thinking about a move. He's already come past Irwin. These 3 swapping and changing. That's what has allowed Jack Hart to begin to close in, along with Charlie Farrar. But still, that gap between 5th and 6th positions is just over a second. And so there's no opportunity for them, as things stand, to take a podium place. And it's a 3-rider battle for 3rd position and a 2-rider duel up front between the top 2 in the championship for the race victory here at Donington Park.
Yeah, and Ogden just stretching his lead now. It's up to 8/10 of a second. It looks like he's got enough in hand. Rhys Irwin trying to get himself down into the podium spots here as well. Rhys Irwin picks off 2 for 1, and he's now up into 3rd place. He's chasing his first podium in the British Talent Cup.
Buy one, get one free for Irwin, who manages to hit the front of that secondary duel ahead of Jack Nixon. And certainly a very good ride there from the Irishman, Rhys Irwin, to get a buy one, get one free, as we were saying. Through for 3rd position, but it doesn't last long. Nixon comes back past. Will Swan fancy a move down the inside? Yes, he will. So just as quickly as he picked off 2 riders in 1 turn, he's lost 2 positions, down 1 straight. He's going to get back into the slipstream, though. 2 turns still to come. They head down to the Melbourne Loop for the final time. 3 abreast. Irwin goes for the inside. He's very late, but he can't quite get there. He's gained 1 position at the front of the field. Scott Ogden becomes the first rider to win 3 races in this 2019 British Talent Cup. Horseman comes over the line in 2nd position, the only other race winner this season so far. And 3rd place, who will get it? It looks like it's going to be Nixon. Jack Nixon claims 3rd over the line ahead of Scott Swan. Great effort from the Northern Irishman, up from 12th on the grid and through to 4th position, ahead of Irwin, ahead of Hart, Farrar, and also Brian Hart, who in the end actually 3rd position all the way down to 8th position, was covered by just 1.3 seconds.
Yeah, really close in that fight for the podium, and for Nixon, he's able to have his first podium in the season, and for Scott Ogden, he's had podiums now in every race so far this season. He extends his championship points lead to 25 points, so he is just giving himself that bit of a buffer now. And tomorrow's race here at Donington Park, that could be really crucial. That's the halfway point of the season, and that's where that man on the 23 Horseman knows that he really needs to start closing back those championship points.
2 4th places in the last 3 races for Jack Nixon, so a podium was on the cards, but he's managed to convert it here today with a good inside manoeuvre, or a good manoeuvre down the straight, the Dunlop straight, heading towards the Fogarty S's, and managed to pick off 2 riders there.
Yeah, Nixon able to get that first podium, and they've been all quite evenly matched, whether you look at Nixon, Swan, Irwin, all the way through this season. Jack Hart as well, he's been up there as well. They've all been in those scraps for those top 5 places, and now we've seen Nixon and Swan both up there on the podium.
Just 11 points covered riders from 3rd down to 9th coming into this round. So very close between those riders that you were just talking about, Steve. Those are the riders who were in the mix from 3rd position down. Obviously, that also means that Fenton, Seabright and Harvey Claridge, each with a non-scoring race, have tumbled back somewhat in the order. And Swan, with his 4th position, ends up going 3rd overall. But big gaps between the top 3, close in the pack behind.
Yeah, and that's the problem for the likes of Fenton Seabright. He's had both of his crashes, Silverstone at the opening race of the season, and now here today at Donington Park, both coming from that lead group, and suddenly you miss out on big points from those crashes and you find yourself all the way down the championship standings. 8th place now for Fenton Seabright in the championship, 67 points adrift to Scott Ogden. So for the likes of Fenton Seabright, suddenly you've gone from being a bit of a title contender to now you're just going to race out the rest of the year trying to pick up those race wins and try and just show people just how good you can be.
Big gap on the circuit between Horseman in 2nd and Nixon in 3rd. Now, part of that was the circumstance of the race. The field splintered in the early stages. But it must be said that if there's a big advantage in terms of pace for these lead 3 riders, it makes it that much harder for anyone else to try and make up ground in the championship.
Yeah, exactly. And it makes it that much harder to be able to be in those fights for the podium unless any of those riders hit problems. We saw Horseman hit problems last time around after that crash with Charlie Farrar. We saw that for the likes of Seabright, he's crashed out of 2 races. That's what gives the opportunities to fight for the podium, because right now the top 3 riders in this class so far this season have been Ogden, Horseman and Fenton Seabright.
Track conditions weren't optimal today compared to what we saw yesterday. Obviously, we had glorious weather. The sun is starting to come out now, but it's a little bit too late. And as we said just a couple of hours ago, it was raining here at Donington Park. So only 3 retirements from the race, 3 falls, 2 of them in the early stages, O'Shea and Claridge, Seabright later on. Good effort from the young riders here today, provided a good show.
Yeah, and when you look at the lap times, they're only about a half a second slower than their pace in the qualifying session. So while the conditions weren't ideal, they were able to at least have a dry line and set some fast times. So a good performance by all the riders. And as you said, Alex, only 3 riders crashing out in what has been pretty tricky conditions all the way through the day here at Donington Park.
Scott Ogden with the clean sweep, pole position, fastest lap of the race and race victory, and he leads our championship, and his championship lead is now up to 25 points. Perfect day.
Yeah, it's not a bad day at all, that really, for Scott Ogden, and he rode really well there to be able to claim that race victory. This is Ogden just rolling his bike back into Parc Fermé, and on that number 4 machine he didn't put a foot wrong. He was able to get himself to the front and able to see off anyone that was able to fight with him, and he rode smart as well. He was able to pick his battles and make sure he was able to get himself to the front just whenever he needed it.
And he's got the energy to run that bike back in.
Well, it's amazing what energy you can find after you've been winning a race.
Scott Ogden does exactly that then. To extend his championship lead, as we said, it was 20 points coming into this race after a non-score for Cameron Horseman last time out. Fenton Seabright now with 2 non-scores. If Scott Ogden just keeps putting in the points, putting in the podiums, that's half the battle.
Yeah, exactly. It's now podiums make prizes for him rather than points make prizes. As long as he's able to keep himself in those top 3, 4, 5 spots, he suddenly becomes very difficult to beat in this championship. As I said, we're only 5 rounds in. Tomorrow is the halfway point of the season. From that point on, you move on to Snetterton with BSB, and then a couple of rounds supporting MotoGP at Brno and Silverstone, and that's really whenever you've got the opportunities to consolidate your points, give yourselves a real target. But for Scott Ogden, he's now got the target on his back as the championship leader by 25 points. That's
the 5th race of our 2019 season, the first of 2 this weekend. Sets us up very nicely for the 6th race tomorrow.
Yeah, it looks like it should be a really good race tomorrow as well. Obviously, we should see Seabright up there as well. Of course, he qualified in the front row of the grid in 2nd position, and he crashed out of those podium spots as well. So he'll expect to be a contender in tomorrow's race. And all these riders, the likes of Nixon, Swan, Irwin, Hart, Charlie Farrar, they'll all expect to be able to make a step forward as well.
Yes, they'll have learnt from today's action, no doubt about that. We're going to see the overtake for the lead on the final lap again.
Yeah, and you can see here from Ogden, this is the move he made on Fenton Seabright to take that lead, and he was able to hold that tight line. He was able to do a good job just to making sure that he could have that drive through Coppice. That's where he seemed to be really strong, because once we got down into the breaking point, down in towards the Fogarty S's, he was always able to break deeper than everyone else. He would always be aggressive through that corner.
3 abreast going in to the Melbourne Loop. I'm sure that there were a few that had their hearts in their mouths, but all 3 got round and well deserving of the podium position. Nixon in the end in that secondary battle. Yeah, that was a real battle as well with Nixon, Swan and Irwin, and then that group behind them just catching until on the final lap we actually had 7 riders all together there on the final couple of corners. But for Nixon to be able to come out on top, good ride from him. That secondary group with Farrar and the 2 Hearts didn't quite quite get there in time to make a manoeuvre.
Yeah, they were just that little step behind and not able to quite make up the margin that they needed to make up. If they had it been one more lap, maybe they would have been right there or thereabouts. But unfortunately for them, they were just catching, but not quite close enough to really be able to attack.
Farah and the Two Hearts, I remember that one. It sounds like a 70s band. They finished in 6th to 8th positions here today in the end, unable quite to get on terms with Nixon, Swan and Irwin, 3rd, 4th and 5th places. So our podium positions then, 3rd is the first to be awarded to Jack Nixon. As I said, a long time coming in the sense that he's had a 4th place in race 2 in each of the opening 2 rounds this season. He manages to step up to 3rd position. 2nd place to Cameron Horseman, not quite what he wanted after a retirement last time out, but that's the only step of the podium that he hasn't been on so far in 2019, so he's completed the set. And Scott Ogden, 1st, 3rd, 2nd, 1st and 1st. That is a very impressive start to this 2019 season. Obviously, statistically speaking, the probability of hearing the British National Anthem is much higher in the British Talent Cup than in other series, but there it is, the National Anthem for our winner, Scott Ogden, who's certainly going to be getting used to success in 2019. That is his 3rd win of this campaign. He's been on the podium at each of the opening 5 races of the season so far.
Yeah, really strong start to the season there for Scott Ogden, and richly rewarded in the championship points as well. That consistency's made a big difference, as you said earlier on, Alex. 3 race wins, 2 podiums, and that's why he's been able to turn that into a 25-point championship lead.
So it's Scott Ogden who takes victory here in the first of 2 races this weekend at the 3rd round of the 2019 British Talent Cup from Donington Park. And as we've said, more racing still to come in this series this weekend, with race number 2 here tomorrow. 3 Englishmen on the podium, Scott Ogden, Cameron Horseman and Jack Nixon in the end, getting ahead of Scott Swan and Rhys Irwin. They went 3 abreast into the Melbourne Loop on the final lap, but each came out unscathed. That secondary group behind of Jack Hart as well as Charlie Farah going with them, not quite able to strike in time. Ross Maguire picks up a few points for 13th position, directly behind Elliot Pinson. 3 non-finishers, all involved in their own respective collisions separately from one another. Fenton Seabright in the closing stages of the race, the other 2 earlier on in the action. A look at the Riders' Championship then, with 1 day still to go of round 3 here at Donington Park. It's Scott Ogden who leads it by 25 points ahead of Cameron Horseman. Scott Swan has made up 3 positions in the series standings, obviously partly as a result of crash for Fenton Seabright, who drops down from 3rd to 8th overall, but not much of a margin. You look from 3rd to 8th are covered by just 8 points in the series standings. Harvey Claridge failing to score, that's dropped him somewhat adrift in 9th position. Race number 2 then, still to come here at Donington Park. Join us for that tomorrow. The 6th race of the 2019 season will bring us to the halfway mark in the 2019 British Talent Cup.